2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zürn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Today on the show we have Gerry Scullion. Gerry is the founder of This Is HCD, the global human-centered design podcast and international design community of changemakers. And he is founder and CEO of thisisdoing.com. In a previous life, he was a musician and songwriter that released 2 albums under the moniker of Circus, and he worked among others with 13-time Grammy-winning producer Rafa Sardina. A few months ago, I was guest on his podcast, and we talked about the interrelationship of music and design and what design can learn from music. So today, we talk about how the shared mindset comes back in the daily life of a facilitator, service designer, and change maker. And Gerry gives us insights how it was like working with a top-notch producer that had the experience, knowledge, and ability to drill down and zoom in on a detail and then drill the whole way out to see the whole. And we talk about bringing vulnerability and laughter to co-create innovation and to engage people to be their very best. And by the way, the instrument you hear in the beginning is the theremin we talked about in our first conversation. So let's get into it. Welcome, Gerry. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a long-term listener, as in I've been listening since you launched your podcast. So I'm honored to be a guest.
And thank you for promoting it. And that's also that we could say this is episode 2 of our talk, because the first talk we did on your podcast, and we will talk about this also later. And now, so I'm inviting you back, and but let's start with what was your first concert or performance or sonic experience that had an impact on you?
My first sonic experience was probably Jean-Michel Jarre. Way back in the 80s. I've got an older brother, Raymond, who heavily influenced my musical taste, so to speak. But I remember being a very young boy sitting under a snooker room in our house growing up. I know, privileged. My brother was mad into snooker, so I remember sitting underneath the snooker table and hearing the sounds of Jean-Michel Jarre playing. I think it was Equinox, and completely blew my mind because it sounded like it was from the future. Yeah. And I had to be convinced that a human made this, that it wasn't from some alien force that was creating it. But then after that, it was the Blue Nile, which are a band from Scotland who I still idolise, and their music sonically probably define my broader interests in music. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's up to you what you answer. And interesting to hear. Jean-Michel Jarre. I don't know if people still know who he is, but he was in the 70s. This was really full electronic music. And when we talk about electronic music, it wasn't sampling. It was really working with synthesizers. And by the way, I brought something for you.
Hey. Man, that sound. I have it on one of my albums, actually.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, it's so distinctive. It's used in all those Hitchcock movies, of course, like the scariness and stuff. But so I guess, musically, I've played music from the age of probably about 5. I started taking up music, and I played the piano, played the guitar, and right now I play the ukulele for my 2 children, and I don't get enough time to mess around with my guitar pedals and my guitars, which are in the back of the setup here that I have at home.
Yeah. Nice ukulele. I love it too. I also play. Maybe that's the instrument that I play most at home because
Yeah.
it's so easy to grab, easy to tune,
Absolutely. Yeah, you can tune it by your ear.
But before we dive into
Yeah.
much more music, maybe you would like to introduce yourself. So, who are you, Gerry, and what do you
Who
do
am
for a
I?
living?
What do I do for a living? That is a complex question, but I am a human-centered designer. I'm the CEO of thisisdoing.com, which is a live classroom design and innovation training organization. We work globally. And how I make a living is through teaching design online. And I facilitate sessions for organizations, mainly in around Europe at the moment, like design research and service design based work. But I guess today is an interesting one because my previous life, I guess when I finished university, I had dreams to play music full time. And it's something that, you know, I see design and music as being two very much the same thing.
Nice. That's why you're here. So, in the power of music thinking.
Yeah.
And but talk a little bit more about facilitation, online facilitation. Did you do this before the COVID thing, also online, or
Yeah.
yeah?
So it was there's a kind of a co-op of sorts within This Is Doing. Many of the people that I've grown up reading and respecting are part of the business. So we've got one of the world's best design and innovation teams. And many of the people there work internationally. And when I lived in Australia, I worked across Australia, and Australia being such a huge country, many times I'd be working, I'd have to facilitate sessions online because it was cost prohibitive to run workshops in face-to-face. You'd have to, sort of include flights and hotels and so forth for what might only be possible for 2 or 3 hours, whereas it's a lot more affordable to do it online. And it was always seen as a kind of like a sort of a second-rate experience. But I guess over the last 18 months to 2 years, working with the likes of Mark Stickthorne and Adam Lawrence and many of the team at This Is Doing, we really transformed how we work and changed how we deliver workshops. And it's not just about the mechanics of it, but it's also the experience leading up to it and thinking holistically about how people are going to learn through, what is essentially a piece of plastic in people's hands or people's plastics in a room. We really try and think holistically what that looks like and how that feels like for an experience of somebody who might be learning something radically new. So we've kind of evolved a lot over the last 18 months. And, from our feedback from our customers is like they're having incredible experiences.
Yeah, that's in the old times when we were in rooms and did the workshops and the facilitation, and then let's say the last 1 year, 1.5 year, it went mainly online. But now we get into a hybrid situation where some people are in the room and some people are somewhere on the screen. Do you have experiences in facilitating, let's say, hybrid?
In hybrid
meetings?
Australia, like a lot of the stuff would be hybrid, where you might have a couple of sessions online, and then you might sort of design a more of an intense, compressed experience in face-to-face. It tends to not really work very well when you've got a hybrid in the one session. So some people are online, some people are offline. I've done it. I facilitated sessions in Africa last year, in Kenya and Cameroon and stuff, where internet connections were restricted, and we would have more than one person on a connection. And it's much more difficult to facilitate. At the moment, we still come from that mindset. It's quite a privileged mindset, I might want to add, that every person has their own internet connection. So at the moment, we're still kind of restricted by that mindset that in order to learn, you need an internet connection, and it needs to be one-on-one. But what does it look like, how it scales when you've got 2 or 3 people at the one machine, is something that it's in my mind. I haven't come up with any way of doing it any better than we've done it before, which was it's a lot of slower, a lot more kind of, it requires more attention and more dedication to each person who's on that connection.
Yeah, and it's not so easy like in a room where you see that some person might not be
Paying
engaged as much.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you get people to turn on the video?
Well, I don't. I always give people the option, and I don't stress about it because, we're online all day. Well, I'm online all day, and I've got a camera pointed at my face all day. And if people want to turn it off, that's fine. And I trust them that they're able to listen and watch me. And if they want to be watched, maybe they're eating, maybe they're having a cup of tea, maybe they just don't want to have the camera on because they're having a bad hair day, which I'd like to add is never a problem for me because I'm bald. But it's something that some people really stress for it, and it is definitely, when you're training, it's much better to see people's faces because you know that they're paying attention and they're engaged. When the cameras go off, there's lots of other things at play there, and it's not up to me to really probe. But there are other benefits which we could talk about: the impact on life and the impact on energy usage and impact on sustainability. It uses an awful lot less bandwidth when people don't have their cameras turned on. And the impact that has on life is huge. So if everyone in the world decided just to do these things on phones, I mean, phones still exist. We just don't do phone calls as much anymore. We do Zoom calls. That would have an exponential kind of effect on the earth and the amount of energy that's used.
Oh, so that's an interesting aspect. So instead of, because I would say if people have the camera on, me as a facilitator, I can see what's going on and I can act and react.
Yeah.
And but sometimes we forget that all the online stuff that we're doing is having
a huge impact. Having a huge impact on the earth, like all the data centers and all the energy that's used to support the infrastructure and how we're actually surviving, running businesses. It has a huge effect on the earth. But it's also, we're 18 months, maybe 20 months into this pandemic. People are tired. People are exhausted, in fact. And I think there's a certain point now where I don't ever ask people to turn on their webcams. I know certain trainers that we work with always encourage it because you get a much better experience. But I'm just much more aware that sometimes people have had a bad night's sleep. They've got 2 young kids. And sometimes the last thing I want to do is turn on my camera. I just want to absorb passively, and I want to lie back and put my feet on the desk. And that's fine with me. So again, coming from a human-centered design perspective, as being much more about the mindset of how you actually approach working with people. I just place trust in people that they're paying attention, and it's up to them if they want to learn.
Okay, but that's for learning experiences. If you would have a facilitation of a workshop where you need the interaction.
Yeah, you need It is different where you do need people to interact. I mean, it's I've had sessions before where there's silence, where everyone just goes on mute, and it seems to be a corporate thing wherever they log in, they say hello, turn off the cameras and go on mute. And I don't want to say it's soul destroying, but it's definitely, you feel empty for a large parts of it, because we are humans. We respond to sounds and touches and smells and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of that stuff is taken away by working online. And if you don't even hear an echo or a question or a round of applause or whatever it is, you don't know if you're doing a good job, and you don't know if they're paying attention. So there has been times where you feel like, well, hello? Is there anybody out there? As Roger Waters once said in a Pink Floyd song. But I do feel that at times where there's complete silence. So if you do leave your camera on and you do leave your mic on, I love the sound of people, picking up, doing this kind of sound. I love that. Like that shows that you're here with me, and it's a shared experience. That's the stuff that I try to encourage, but I can't enforce it. It's impossible.
Yeah. So the focus on audio might be much more important.
Yeah.
Or sound.
Sound in general is a really important thing. Like there's a group of us as part of this is doing that. We always Well, we saw a shift. Like originally, I always had a good setup. I'm a podcaster. I run This Is HCD. It started from what was a Blue Yeti microphone initially, but now I've got a pretty full production kind of setup in my converted attic at home. So what I saw was, and Marcus Hormez, who's a wonderful designer based out of Germany, and he's part of This Is Doing, and also one of the co-authors of This Is Service Design, doing a fantastic book. Marcus made the observation right back at the start of the pandemic when we were launching This Is Doing, which was just coincidence. We had nothing to do with the pandemic. It wasn't us, okay? We didn't have anything to do with Wuhan, okay? But Marcus said, look, we are now moving into the world of TV production. We're no longer just doing workshops. So how we distinguish ourselves is there's a level of assumption that whenever we go to facilitate, that we will have good audio and we'll have good cameras, and the quality will feel more like a production. So I've got a soundboard here to my right here, and at all times, if I'm facilitating, I might put some music on in the background. Like, so say, is it okay to put some music on now at the moment? So I might start off my sessions like this. Hey folks, brilliant to have you here. And music for me, it's part of how I work. But when you introduce that into how you open your sessions and how you close your sessions, it feels more professional. But it feels more at home for me because I am more of a performer in that sense. And how I deliver the performance, I want to make sure that they realize that I'm calm. I know what I'm doing. And by having the confidence to include this stuff in how I work, I believe it actually changes how you're perceived. So, I know Marcus, I looked to the likes of Adam Lawrence. They get a good laugh out of that, Marcus Hormez. But Adam and Renatus, who I work with, it's like watching Sonny and Cher. It's like watching the two of them working together. They're brilliant facilitators, and they have it really well oiled at this stage, and how they actually include music. And I remember working with Adam, and whenever people went into breakout rooms, Adam had a sound effect not too dissimilar to this, but when they all started to come back in after their breakout sessions, it felt like you were returning back after a nice massage and say, how did you all get on there, folks? And everyone started to laugh. I mean, how good is that? If people can laugh and cannot laugh as solo, laugh in unison, yep. It's a really nice thing to add to how you facilitate sessions. So it's something that once I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm nicking that one. That one's coming right onto my beautiful Rodecaster here that I know I use and you use as well now. So it's a fantastic introduction to do it whenever you facilitate.
Absolutely nice, and it also keeps it a little bit soft and nice. And if people love what you said, that's a great thing. What you want more, that people are uplifted in the way how they are engaged in a workshop.
Absolutely. I mean, if people do something good, it's always nice to get a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Or people want to crack a bad joke. Thank you, folks. But we like, obviously there's a threshold there. You don't want to cross the line where you suddenly become a Laurel and Hardy sketch online. Yeah. So it's how it's used and when it's used. You have to be aware of certain instances where it's not appropriate.
Yeah. Nice. It's also with the icebreakers, the energizers, the mindsetters in the beginning, that when you have normal meetings and it's weekly meetings or daily meetings and you have a check-in, some people are really tired from, hey, can we just begin? So it's also, you have to feel, and I also see this human-centered design doesn't mean that's what humans want or need. No, you always have to feel and sense and listen to what they're really up to.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm hired to run a workshop for an organization, and depending on the topic, I'm not going to be throwing music in. It has to be fitting for the environment that and the audience as well. Otherwise, you could be seen as a stand-up comic and you won't be taken seriously. But if I'm training people online and I'm training in my own kind of domain of service design, and they kind of expect a certain level of professionalism, and if the moment's right, I'll absolutely use sound to help break the ice.
So a few things come together, what we just said. So I see a direct line from Jean-Michel Jarre and the electronics and how this changes the music world. And I also see the hybrid situation we're in and the TV production or the radio production. So we are all DJs now, or we're all TV producers. And when you go to live events, and sometimes you also get a hybrid situation, because when the concert is also broadcasted live. So this means people in the room see a lot of technique, which distracts sometimes their experience. And people at home, they just see a part and a very close close up, which people in the venue don't see. So I think that's interesting to learn. That's also a very nice link to the music business. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your encounters with the, you call it Minus Circus?
Minus Circus, that was my stage name that my old Swedish girlfriend actually suggested the name for my band. I should point out that they didn't suggest it for my band; they suggested it for their business that I went and then bought, which was a bit of a sneaky thing for me. But I've probably around 2003, I'd finished university and I had dreams about playing music, and I'd been in bands before, but I was always the person playing guitar. I never really had the courage to step up in front of the mic and be the front man, so to speak. But in 2004, I guess it was, I started to, when I come back from Australia the first time, I started to get a little bit more serious about it. I was kind of in between. I'd finished my degree and I realized now, if you're going to do it, now's the time to try and do it. And I started to write songs, and I started to do open mic sessions around Dublin. And I started to get more traction, and I, formed a band off the back of the name, and we started to do some gigs around Ireland, and we started to build a following. And then MySpace happened. MySpace happened in 2005, and suddenly it was a game changer. It was night and day. We could build an audience that was international, and we could put our demos up there, and we could actually build a following. So I started to get some traction in America, and in 2006, I saved my money up and I crashed on a friend's couch in Los Angeles, and I played a couple of gigs. And after one of the gigs, much like you hear in the movies, someone came up to me and was like, "Hey, I want to introduce you to somebody." And I was okay. And that person introduced me to another person. And I felt like I was in Almost Famous, that movie. Couldn't drive, which is a nightmare when you're in Los Angeles and you're a musician. I was like, at the beck and call of my wonderful friend over there, Aaron Olden, who drove me around. And I went to one producer's house. His name is Cheche Alara, who's a wonderful guy now. He's a fantastic producer and musical director. And he's worked with everyone. Literally, his list is so long that I don't even need to drop any names. He's Argentinian, and he heard my songs. I had to play like on a stool in his studio. And then he says, "I want you to introduce you to another person who I work with. His name is Rafa Sardina." And this was kind of like, I didn't know who Rafa Sardina was at the time. And the meeting was scheduled for the next morning. And I remember driving up, it was near Malibu in Calabasas in Los Angeles, and I played my songs for Rafa. And it was much like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where at the very end, Charlie walks into the room and he leaves the gobstopper. That was like me leaving my demo disc to Rafa. He was like, thanks for your time. And I walked out and I was like, I don't know how that went. And later on that night, Rafa called me and goes, "Look, we want to offer you a production deal. We want to bring you over to America and we'll put together a band for you." And I was like, whoa. I am a band. And he's like, no, you're not. He's like, it's you. You are what we want to work with. We don't know those other people. So I had to have that kind of tough conversation with people back in Ireland at the time, what it meant. And I'd give them my word that if anything happened, we would reform, and I would include them in that process. But I went over to Los Angeles and recorded a demo /EP that was with a view to try and getting an extended deal with the labels. This was 2007 or stuff, and it started to have rippled effects in the industry online at that stage. and labels are dropping bands. So I use that. This is how I psychologically use that as my excuse why I didn't get signed. But the reality was I probably wasn't that good. And I had that EP, but I had a wonderful experience. It wasn't that I feel like it was a failure. It actually formed my mindset. It had a huge effect on how I see music and how I see design, and working with what I would consider to be the best in the business. And a lot of those session players that I worked with have then gone on to have huge careers, like Sean, who was my bassist, is now John Mayer's bassist in Los Angeles. And I remember Pete Thorne, who was the guitarist, he the week after that, when I left, I remember I was playing a beautiful Gibson, beautiful, like a, I don't know, it was like a Sunbird of some sort. The week after, he got picked up by Chris Cornell, and he started to play with Chris Cornell until Chris died. I say Chris like he knew, like we were friends. But anyway, I remember seeing Chris Cornell playing that guitar a week after I arrived back into Dublin, and it was so trippy for me. But a lot of the people that I worked with, they were just incredible. They were mind-blowingly talented. And I saw how they actually work with my sketches of ideas, and how they brought these things alive was transformative for me. And I carry that through to this day in how I apply that thinking into design.
Wow, what a story. And you're very humble, because you had one, you released a podcast, I think just a few weeks ago, with Rafa Sardina. And he's a very well-known person.
Yeah. It was funny because it was good that I didn't really know that much about Rafa when I originally met. Rafa's an interesting person. Okay, he's Basque in Spain, and when we worked together, I remember we had so many funny stories. It was so many funny times working together, where his manager then became my manager for a period of time, and that person, Clarice was her name, used to manage Ocean Way Studios in Los Angeles, and that's how Rafa got his break. And I remember doing, I was upstairs in one of Rafa's rooms in the studio, and in the kitchen area there was a picture, and it was a layout, and it was signed, and I was like, "Who's that signed by?" And he's like, "Oh, that's Frank Sinatra." And I was like, "Whoa, you worked with Frank Sinatra?" And he was like, "Yeah." He said, "Man, what an experience!" And this is what it was like in the breakout rooms, where I felt completely like, not worthy to be amongst these people who worked with Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, James Brown. Like they've met and they've experienced, working with these people. And then there was me, little old 25-year-old Gerry, sitting in the room kind of going, "Is anyone going to have the last slice of pizza?" Or will I had nothing to add to the conversation. I was like, "Yeah, when I go back to Ireland, I'm thinking I might try and book a gig." I had nothing to add, and it was an unusual experience for me to feel like that, because they were what I would call cats. They were out there. They were playing with the best, and they were touring the world. And then there was me, and it made me feel a little bit more like the hill is, and the mountain is so big to get to that point. But it also gave me hope that I was here, I was trying these things out, and I was learning. That was the most important thing. That's the way I framed it in my mind. I was just going to learn as much as I possibly can from them.
What did you learn? Can you give us an example? And can you give us an example, what did you learn that you use today?
Yeah, I guess working with Rafa is really interesting, because Rafa is a mixer. Okay, he's a producer, but he's also a mixer. So his ears are his livelihood. He has got an incredible ability to drill what I would, in my world, from different zoom levels. So he's able to hear everything and understand the journey of how that sound was created. So in terms of processors, in terms of mics, in terms of leads, in terms of room, in terms of everything needs to be considered when he's recording. Hang on.
So that's not only the mixer, but that's also the analytical skills.
Yeah.
So because if because you just mentioned where they come from, how these sounds are made, then you can mix them. But if you already have them together, it's good to understand where do they come from and what's their origin and speciality.
Exactly. I remember there was instances where he just spent a lot of time trying to figure out the mic situation for my voice and which mic would work best. And, you know, he had access to phenomenal gear that he would just use, and he would test, and he would listen for, you know, what felt best, because he was able to drill down. He knew, he had the knowledge that if I recorded this mic and this worked well, it'll balance really nicely in the mix for these other things. So he was working what I would consider from a service design perspective. He was working at a very drill down, very low level, zoom level. And he was able to zoom all the way back out, and he knew where this is going. He said, okay, well, he would have these conversations with me. I remember one of these songs, I'd written about maybe 40 or 50 songs to go over there, and they would pick four songs that are 5 songs, I can't remember, that he thought they had legs, as he would say. They could grow and they could work with them. One of the songs they picked out, I remember saying, please don't pick this one out. This was a throwaway song. It was called Revolve. And it was very poppy. And the hook in it was, I want to be happy. Okay, right? And even as I say it now, it's cheesy. But believe it or not, it was the song that people have paid for. Like, labels have used it, and it's been used in advertising and so forth at this. But because it's such a strong hook. And I remember him sitting down beside me and was like, look, why don't you like this? And I go, because I don't want to be perceived as like a pop star. Okay, I'm not that person. He was like, look, I know where you're from. He says, I know where you're from. I know you adore U2. I know you love the rock bands. It's part of your culture in Ireland. He says, give me your trust that I will not make you sound like you are like a pop star. And I said, okay, you're going to put some heavy guitars into this, because I couldn't play this one live. And he was like, okay, cool. So I gave him some sounds to work with. But again, it's the ability to build trust with the artist, and the ability to work with the artist and put them at ease. He was a master stakeholder manager, a master editor, a master producer, a master in all aspects in how you would create something. And that is kind of what I learned the most from working with him, and both Cheche. Cheche was incredible as well to work with back in the time. It seems so strange to talk about something that happened like 15, 16 years ago, but it's still something that I would reflect on. And I know I listened to Pork McGuire, who I know introduced you from the Thrills. I listened to that episode, and he speaks about the same thing as well, where he was working with Tony Hoffer, who coincidentally I actually was communicating with about recording those songs as well. He was one of the people that I'd met in Los Angeles around that time. And the ability to work and solve problems from, sonically is very similar to how you solve problems within organizations. And from a musician's perspective, I carry that forward in everything that I do. So it's interesting to hear his perspective on things as well.
I also hear something like quality versus commercial instinct. And I think that might be also very good analogy to service design, where we do research, where we as service designer, we really know it. And sometimes the bad business, they make different decisions, things like this. And absolutely. I think that's an interesting one, not only to go for that quality and that, let's call it genre, that genre, but also make it a little bit broader and see what does it do for people. And one appreciation from people is that they would buy it. So there's nothing wrong with that. There is a link. I would say it's the other way around if you just only do it for commercial instinct. And I think that's something that where we as good service designer get some kind of distortion where we say, no, that's just selling. So we really want the quality, and there's nothing wrong if there's good quality, if there's also a commercial link.
Absolutely. I remember when I was out there, that was what they were doing. They were effectively creating a set of songs that would showcase, that would lead to something else. Okay, so the commerciality aspect was really important. And whenever I spoke to Rafa, it was one of the things that I was keen to understand a little bit more about how bands do it, like in the present day and also in the past. That's what the A&R person was. They were looking for the hit. They were looking for that sound that was going to fit. And they've got these incredible ears for those sounds and those movements and genres that are going to emerge. And when it comes to mixing and producing, Rafa, he works at Lady Gaga and a few other people. Like when he's mixing Lady Gaga's albums, he's always looking about what other stuff is going on out there. So it fits and it feels familiar, and it's got that stickiness that people are going to listen to and kind of go, it feels fresh, but it also feels kind of like I've heard maybe this one before, but I like it, and it grows. There's a somewhat of a science behind those things. And it was interesting to hear when I spoke with them that it hasn't really evolved that much. I wanted to see were they testing those ideas out? Were they testing those new songs out, like a listening room and saying, "Oh, I love that song," and it might only be a demo, but they weren't doing that. So it's still very much in the human aspect of somebody there has got these magic ears that's able to sit back and listen and kind of go, "That's going to be a hit. Do it again," and working with it and refining it and making it into what could be a super hit. So it's interesting to see that hasn't really changed that much.
Where's the mixing part in our business, in service design or design thinking? Where's the mixing part? Because the mixing part later on is done sometimes by other people that are less connected to the service design, or to put it the other way around. Sometimes people ask me, what is service design? And you know that in the music thinking framework, I'm connecting a lot of things like organizational change, branding, and I think service design is really good if it really can connect with everything, and that everybody understands the, let's say, customer journey or the persona or for whom we are doing this, and that we have proof from quantitative data and qualitative data. But the part is, how could we bring these experience, this knowledge and this quality from the mixing to business?
Yeah.
Can we teach people?
Can you teach people? Well, you can 100% teach people. You mightn't be trying to make people a designer, but you need to make them aware that they're designing when they're working, and that's the differentiation. It's not about making everyone a designer or a musician.
That's a good thing. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, you can teach the skills to people about how design works, okay? But the outcome that you're trying to teach is not sometimes to become a designer. It's to teach the language of design. So that be aware that when you're working in an organization, that there's thousands and thousands of micro decisions being made on a day-to-day basis that affect the end experience of your customers or the people using that service. So they might not ever become a designer, but they need to be aware that they are designing. So the role of a designer is somebody who is aware of the craft and the ability to work in these complex environments and make sense out of the signal to noise ratio. And going back to your first question of who's the mixer in that instance, that would be the service designer. So somebody who is the ability to move from high up and the ability to move really low down. That is a skill that not everyone has. And sometimes I would argue that it might be a very difficult thing to teach because some people mightn't have the interest to go all the way down to the nuts and bolts. So whenever I'm interviewing people for service design roles, I'm always interested to see in other behaviors that they have in their life that they have that kind of curiosity to go really deep into what can be seen as the weird, the tinkering of electronics versus, at the moment I've got I don't know if you can see in the background there, I've got a Commodore Amiga from the 1990s that I've got. And now I'm about to embark on the journey about sort of retrofitting this thing into the modern world. That there is something, if someone said to me in an interview, I'm like, okay, cool. They're interested in the minutiae, the small details, because those small details is what distinguish average design with great design.
I like this very much. I would like to translate this in instrument knowledge. So it's one part to play an instrument, but it's another one to really understand what that instrument can do. And I think the first one, that's for the designer. They have to play that instrument. And in the framework, I call everything instruments, like a business model canvas or a persona, customer journey. So I call these instruments. Yeah. And to explain people, you have to learn these instruments. It's not just a poster to fill. And then bring it in and really make something out of it where you can make sound decisions. On the other hand, the people have to understand what this instrument can do. So the not designers that make decisions that have an impact on design. So that's I like that.
It's interesting, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we need a little bit of silence, isn't it?
No, it's true. Like, I think within design, organizations can get very much attached to a certain thing. So they can get attached to a certain type of tool or method that has sort of generated some sort of results for them or generated some sort of value for them. But it's important to mention, like, what got us here is not what is going to get us there. Okay, so we need to always move and be comfortable with that level of ambiguity to test new ways of working and new processes out all the time. And that's something that you would see very much so in the production studio or in the music studio. I remember when I was living in Sydney and I was recording my album over there, and I worked with a guy called Brendan O'Brien, not that Brendan O'Brien, another Brendan O'Brien. Brendan O'Brien, famous grunge producer, a different Brendan O'Brien, equally as talented though. But we were recording in a studio that just had so many instruments. Chris Vallejo owns this wonderful studio called Linear Studios, where, what's the name of that Australian band that got Walking on the Dream? Walking on a Dream. They have
In Excess or?
Oh, not In Excess, but he worked with In Excess. In Excess, post Michael Hutchence have used this album. What are they called? Empire of the Sun. An electronic band. They were fantastic. But they had this studio, Linear Studio in Sydney, phenomenal, okay? Had so many instruments. And just by exposure to these instruments and picking them up in the studio, you could hear these albums that were coming out of it were eclectic. Okay, so the exposure and access to these instruments sort of lended itself to be included in the mix, whereas they weren't put behind closed doors. So you had, all different types of keyboards, pianos, lots of different types of guitars, and he really invested in this way of working. So it was a different way of working, say, when I was in Rafa's, where it was all about the studio, and the studio was an instrument in itself. Whereas in Linear Studios in Australia, it was much more, we've got all these different things, let's play. And it was a different mindset. And I found it really refreshing because, like, even though I can play in the piano, you can lend that same skill into the keyboards or into different types of keyboards. My mind has gone blank, like synthesizers and so forth. The same key structures are there, and the same ways to build the chords are there. And it was just really interesting to say, well, look, actually, that sound doesn't work on this. This doesn't really work. Well, let's try it on this over here. What is this instrument? And we were literally working like that. And it got to the point where there was a lap steel in the background. And I was like, wow. I've always wanted to see and touch a lap steel because they're usually only at gigs.
Maybe you've done to explain to listeners that don't know what a lap steel is, what it is.
A lap steel is typically the sound that you would hear in a country and western song, like, and it's held in the lap, okay? It's got steel strings on it, and you would tend to have a kind of a bottle or
bottleneck.
To make that kind of sound, and you've got some pedals on the ground to try to increase the reverbs and stuff like that, as far as I remember. I was not able to play that very well, okay, even though I was able to play the guitar, okay. In fact, when I say I wasn't able to play it well, that is doing well a disservice, because I was awful, okay. And we ended up getting a great guy in, can't remember his name, to play lap steel on a couple of songs. And it is one of the most beautiful instruments on this planet, okay. It just sonically fills stuff up. I'm pretty sure I heard it on, lots of the stuff from the Thrills, just going back to your previous episode of Porrick. And it's one of those things that would take a long time to get good at. Okay, so it's a stringed instrument, but it's something that I just wasn't able to get my head around. It was holding the guitar differently, so how you form your chords and all that kind of stuff.
And I like it because it's one big glissando. So you're not bound to the frets. It sounds a little bit like this in one way. You also could do with a lap steel, and that brings in something new. Although the bass is like a string. It's the same.
Yeah.
Hey, talking about studio and all these studio experiences, the mixer, the producer, and everything. What would be for service design? What would be our studio, or
Yeah.
should every company have a studio? What would it be, so that it's not just a metaphor that we talk about music and then we talk about design, but how can we make it an analogy so that it
Yeah, yeah.
really goes together, that people are inspired by it?
Okay.
How would you set this up? Would you need musicians?
Well, of course you need musicians. Okay, and the musicians in this instance, it would be in that instance you would just naturally think they're the people. Okay, but I think in service design, people are the most important thing. Okay, so we work with people on a day-to-day basis. Do you need a studio? Yes, you need an environment, whether it be online or an office. How you work, the processes that work, you might be able to co-create music or co-create things through online, but I still believe face-to-face is going to win every single time in that argument. It's not going to go away. Like, we still need that face-to-face connection to really stimulate the ideas, to stimulate the sort of aspect of communication. And we miss an awful lot of that stuff just holistically within our lives. Like, we need to be around people to feel safe and to feel like we're actually being listened to. We spoke about at the start there, like, people turn off the cameras or turn off the things. I don't know if I'm being listened to, and that has an effect on our psychological well-being. And when you are working in this kind of space, in the design and innovation space, you have to be comfortable with making yourself vulnerable. And that's the same thing as musicians. So to put yourself out there and say, I've got an idea, this is a certain lyric that I have that keeps on playing back in my mind. In the music world, it feels comfortable to say that, like the song just arrived. Whereas a lot of those things in business or in design and innovation, you don't have that sense of vulnerability or a comfortability with saying, well, like, I want to do this because I've had an instinct or a gut. Whereas in music creation, it's very much welcomed. Okay, like that whole kind of thinking is there. So going back to your question about in service design, I think people really at the end of the day are the instruments. Okay, so we don't really worry about, I don't really worry about titles or frameworks or any of these things. Like, as you said, like, they're the instruments in some ways, but I like to think of the people, and working with different types of people is really important to make sure we're getting inclusivity and accessibility as part of how we work. It's amazing how many organizations don't think like that, and they end up having teams that are made up of men who've all got no hair and beards and glasses. Okay, right. Like if there's designers listening here, I guarantee you they know a couple on their team, and they all end up looking the same. And you know what? A lot of the services that they create are heavily flawed. They're very much designed for privilege and designed for, exclusivity. They don't design for inclusivity. So we need to make sure that, who we have as part of our team or our band reflect the people that we're designing for. I mean, that's so important. I don't know, the analogy can go all the way down. We could say, like, who's the guitarist, who's the bassist, but I really don't care. It's more about the person and having the right people in the team to start with.
Yeah, and that also comes back to the human-centered design, because all humans are different, and all humans are come from different places, from different levels of money or country.
Absolutely.
And the most important thing is to understand them. I really love your let's say, bring in the vulnerability. And so that you're open and really share what you think, instead of that you get smacked on your head because
Absolutely.
what are you doing now?
Yeah.
Or bring in the emotions.
I mean, Belina Raffi, who's part of This Is Doing, is a phenomenal facilitator, and has a workshop around this whole thing about, designing for vulnerability and bringing that level of thinking into your work in a day-to-day basis. And it's harder to do this online, but you can still totally teach this stuff. Belina's work is brilliant. It's about building jokes together, building a stand-up routine, which I still put as the pinnacle of performance, by the way. The ability to stand up in front of people with a microphone and try and make them laugh. That stuff scares the hell out of me, but Belina is a master. Is okay to stand up there and tell bad jokes, and you're trying to encourage this sense of of responsibility from the team to support that type of mindset. And it's what I would see as one of the great weaknesses amongst businesses out there, that they don't create these environments of safety. They create the opposite. There's environments of fear and toxicity. And it's something that we need to get better at in order to make sure that what we're designing and how we're designing and why we're designing, more to the point, is considered.
Wow, that sounds good to me. And yeah, this encourage people to be their self, their yourself, their best self, and bring in different people.
Yeah.
Gerry, thank you very much for this talk, and
thank you,
and sharing these two, let's say, two fields. But it's like the brain. You have the left side and the right side, and maybe for us it's the design, service design, production, working for business, and the other one is like the feeling, the sound, and we know that's we only have one head.
Well, before we go, folks, I know we're all listening and we all love the work that Christoph does. Can we all have a round of applause for Christoph, please? One of the best.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this, because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.